January 17, 1944, the Ardennes Forest. Belgium, the snow fell in silence. Thick and relentless, blanketing the frozen earth in a shroud of white that muffled the world into stillness. The trees stood like skeletal sentinels, their branches waved, down by ice, groaning softly under the burden. In the distance, the faint rumble of artillery rolled across the hills a constant. Low thunder that had become part of the landscape itself. The air was cold enough to burn the lungs, each breath a visible ghost that vanished into the gray morning light, in a foxhole carved into the frozen ground. A lone American soldier sat motionless, his gloved hands cradling a rifle that seemed older than the war itself. The weapon was long, elegant, in a way that modern firearms were not a bolt-action. Springfield M1903. Its wood stock darkened by years of use, its barrel cold and heavy. Around him, other soldiers huddled with their M1 Garands, semi-automatic, rifles that could spit 8 rounds as fast as a man could pull the trigger. They glanced at him occasionally, their eyes betraying a mixture of pity and doubt. His rifle was a relic, museum piece. Too slow, too old, too dangerous to rely on. When the enemy came screaming out of the fog, but he paid them no mind. His eyes were fixed on the tree line, 300 yards distant, scanning the shadows between the trunks, waiting, watching, breathing in rhythm with the forest itself. He did not know it yet, but in 72 hours he would become a ghost. Story whispered among the German lines, a phantom who killed without sound, without warning, without mercy. And that old rifle, the one they mocked, would become the instrument of a terror so profound that enemy snipers would refuse to move in daylight. Before we continue this story, if you're fascinated by untold tales of World War II, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment of history brought back to life. The Springfield M1903 was never supposed to be in the hands of frontline infantrymen by 1944. It was a First World War design. Adopted by the United States Army in 1903 and carried through the trenches of France and Belgium decades earlier, by the time Nazi Germany invaded Poland, the rifle was already 36 years old, ancient by military standards. The M1 Garand had been declared the standard service rifle in 1936, a semi-automatic marvel. Designed by Canadian-American engineer John Garand, capable of firing faster, reloading quicker, and delivering firepower that the old bolt-action simply could not match. General George S. Patton himself famously called the Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised. It was the weapon of a modern army that valued speed, volume of fire, and overwhelming force. The Springfield, by contrast, was slow. After each shot, the shooter had to manually work the bolt, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering. A new round. It held only 5 bullets compared to the Garand's 8. In a firefight, where seconds meant survival, the Springfield seemed like a death sentence, and yet the rifle had never truly disappeared. Thousands remained in armories, warehouses, and training camps across the United States. When the war began, and the demand for weapons outpaced production, these older rifles were issued to re-echelon troops, military police, and specialists who were not expected to see heavy combat. But they also found their way into the hands of one particular group of soldiers who valued them above all others, snipers, because while the Garand was faster, the Springfield was more accurate. Its longer barrel, its tighter tolerances, its bolt-action mechanism all contributed to a weapon that, in the hands of a skilled marksman, could place a bullet exactly where it needed to go, at distances that made semi-automatic rifles look like toys, fitted with a Unertl or Weaver scope. The M1903 became something else entirely, a surgical instrument capable of delivering death with clinical precision. The soldier in that Belgian foxhole was Corporal Daniel Hartwell. 20 years old, from a small logging town in northern Montana, where the winters were long and the deer were plentiful. He had learned to shoot as a boy, hunting elk with his grandfather in the forests of the Rockies, where a missed shot meant going hungry and a poorly placed shot meant tracking a wounded animal for miles through snow and wind. By the time he was 12, he could hit a running rabbit at 200 yards. By 16, he could drop a buck with a single shot through the heart at 300. When he enlisted in 1942, the Army noticed. They tested him, put him on a range with iron sights and targets at varying distances. He didn't miss. Not once. They handed him a Springfield with a scope and told him to hit a man-sized target at 500 yards. He did. 6 times in a row. They assigned him to sniper training at Camp Perry, Ohio, where instructors taught him the science of windage, elevation, breathing control, and patience. Patience above all, because a sniper's greatest weapon was not the rifle, it was the ability to wait, to remain still, to let the world forget you existed until the moment you squeezed the trigger. By the time Hartwell arrived in Europe in the autumn of 1943, he had fired more than 10,000 rounds through his Springfield. He knew every quirk of the weapon, every tiny imperfection in the barrel, every subtle shift in point of impact, depending on temperature and humidity. The rifle was an extension of his body as familiar as his own hands. But to the other men in his platoon, it was just an old gun, a curiosity, a handicap. The German army understood the value of snipers better than most. From the earliest days of the war, they had trained marksmen with ruthless efficiency, equipping them with scoped Mauser Car 98K rifles and teaching them to operate independently behind enemy lines or embedded within defensive positions. These men were not merely shooters, they were psychological weapons. A single sniper could pin down an entire platoon, sowing fear and paralysis, forcing men to keep their heads down and their movements cautious. In the Eastern Front, Soviet snipers had turned the practice into an art form, with legendary figures like Vasily Zaitsev racking up hundreds of kills in the ruins of Stalingrad. The Germans learned quickly. By 1944, their own snipers were among the best in the world. In the Ardennes, where the forest was dense and sight lines were long, German snipers had become a plague. They operated in pairs, moving silently through the trees, setting up positions in the high branches or behind fallen logs, invisible until they fired. American patrols would venture into the woods and never return. Officers standing in clearings would drop without warning, a single bullet through the chest or skull. Medics rushing to help the wounded would be shot mid-stride. The psychological toll was immense. Men stopped trusting the forest. They moved in short, frantic bursts, diving for cover at every sound, their nerves fraying with each passing day. By January 1944, the 28th Infantry Division Hartwell's unit had lost more than 40 men to sniper fire in less than 2 weeks. Morale was crumbling. Soldiers refused to leave their foxholes unless ordered. Patrols were delayed or abandoned. The forest had become a no-man's land, where death waited patiently in the shadows. The officers knew something had to change. They called for counter-snipers, men who could hunt the hunters. Hartwell was one of 3 snipers assigned to the sector. The others carried Garands fitted with makeshift scopes, adequate weapons, but not purpose-built for the task.
Hartwell
Carried his Springfield. When he arrived at the command post and the captain saw the old rifle, the man frowned. "That thing still work, Corporal?" Hartwell nodded. "Yes, sir. You know we've got Garands, right? Semi-auto? Faster? Yes, sir. But this one shoots straighter." The captain looked skeptical, but said nothing. There was no time to argue. Men were dying. If Hartwell wanted to use a relic, that was his problem, as long as he got results. Hartwell moved into the forest alone. That was how snipers worked independently, relying on stealth and fieldcraft rather than numbers. Carried minimal gear, the Springfield, 200 rounds of ammunition, canteen, hardtack biscuits, and a wool blanket rolled tight across his back. No helmet, it caught too much light. Instead, he wore a knit cap pulled low over his ears.
Ow!
His uniform was mottled with mud and snow, breaking up his silhouette. He moved slowly, placing each step with deliberate care, avoiding sticks that might snap and patches of ice that might crack. His breathing was shallow and controlled. He was a predator now, and the forest was his domain. He spent the first day observing. He found a position on a low ridge overlooking a clearing where American patrols frequently passed. It was a natural kill zone, open ground with limited cover, surrounded by dense trees. Perfect place for an ambush. Settled into the undergrowth, wrapped his blanket around his shoulders, and waited. Hours passed. The cold seeped into his bones, but he did not move. Movement meant detection. Detection meant death. He watched the tree line across the clearing, studying the patterns of light and shadow, looking for anything that did not belong. A shape too regular. A branch that seemed out of place. The faint glint of glass just before noon, he saw it. Flicker of movement 300 yards distant, high in a pine tree. A sniper's nest. The German was good. His position was well concealed, his body hidden behind the thick trunk. But he had made one mistake. The scope on his rifle caught the sun for just a fraction of a second. Tiny flash of light, barely visible. But Hartwell saw it. He did not fire immediately. Patience. Instead, he marked the position in his mind and continued watching. Minutes later, a second sniper revealed himself, this one on the ground behind a fallen log to the left of the tree. They were working together, covering overlapping fields of fire. If Hartwell shot one, the other would spot his muzzle flash and return fire. He waited until the sun shifted. The light changed, casting the tree in shadow. The wind picked up, rustling. The branches masking sound. Hartwell adjusted his position slightly, settling the rifle's stock firmly against his shoulder. He peered through the scope, centering the crosshairs on the base of the pine tree, where the sniper's torso would be. He estimated windage 5 miles per hour from the left, pushing the bullet slightly right. He adjusted his aim 2 inches. Left to compensate, he exhaled slowly, letting half the air out of his lungs, then held. The rifle became perfectly still. The crosshairs stopped moving. His finger rested lightly on the trigger, applying pressure gradually, smoothly, until the Springfield roared. The recoil punched into his shoulder, familiar and solid. Through the scope, he saw the German sniper jerked violently and tumble from the tree, crashing through branches before hitting the ground in a lifeless heap. The second sniper spun toward the sound, trying to locate Hartwell's position. He never got the chance. Hartwell worked the bolt with practiced speed, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a new round in less than 2 seconds. He shifted his aim to the fallen log. The German's head was partially visible, his eyes wide with panic. Hartwell centered the crosshairs on his temple. The second shot echoed through the forest. The German collapsed behind the log and did not move again. Hartwell remained motionless for 10 full minutes, watching for any other movement. There was none. He had killed 2 men in under 5 seconds, and no one had seen him. No one knew where he was. He was a ghost. He moved to a new position before nightfall, never staying in one place too long. That was the first rule of sniping: shoot and move. Always move. The kills were reported back to headquarters by a patrol that discovered the bodies later that afternoon. The German snipers were identified by their equipment-scoped Kar-98K rifles, specialized camouflage, and notebooks containing sketches of American positions. They had been responsible for at least a dozen kills over the past week. Their deaths sent a ripple through the German lines. Snipers operated on confidence and invisibility. The moment they became the hunted, their effectiveness plummeted. But Hartwell was not finished. Over the next 2 days, he moved through the forest like a specter, studying German movements, identifying sniper positions, and eliminating them one by one. He adapted his tactics constantly. Sometimes he fired from extreme range 500 yards or more where the Germans could not possibly pinpoint his location. Other times he moved close, within 200 yards, shooting through gaps and foliage that enemy snipers thought provided cover. He used the terrain to his advantage, positioning himself on reverse slopes where his muzzle flash was hidden from view. He timed his shots to coincide with artillery barrages, masking the sound. By the 3rd day, he had killed 9 German snipers. 9 men who had terrorized the American lines for weeks. The effect was immediate and profound. German sniper activity dropped to almost nothing. The few who remained refused to operate during daylight hours, restricting themselves to night movements where Hartwell's scoped rifle was less effective. American patrols began moving more freely. Morale improved. Men started calling Hartwell the Reaper, though he never heard the nickname himself. He was too busy working. The German commanders noticed. Intelligence reports filtered back from Captured prisoners who spoke of an American sniper who never missed, who struck without warning, who seemed to know where they were before they even set up. Some claimed he used a special weapon, a rifle that fired silently. Others believed he was not one man, but several, operating in coordination. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. He was just one soldier with an old Bolticont rifle and the patience of a predator. But it was not just skill that made Hartwell effective. It was the rifle itself. The Springfield M1903, for all its age, possessed qualities that modern weapons had sacrificed in the name of speed. Its bolt-action mechanism was inherently more accurate than a semi-automatic because there were fewer moving parts to introduce vibration and destabilize the shot. The heavy barrel resisted heat distortion, maintaining consistency even after multiple shots. The longer sight radius, the distance between the front and rear sight, allowed for finer adjustments in aim. The trigger, a simple two-stage design, broke cleanly with no creep or over-travel, giving the shooter perfect control over the moment of ignition. When fitted with a scope, these advantages compounded. The unertl scope Hartwell used was a 10x magnification prismatic design, mounted on the rifle with a system of sliding mounts that allowed the scope to recoil independently of the rifle, reducing the chance of damage and maintaining zero. At distances beyond 300 yards, where the human eye struggled to distinguish details, the scope transformed Hartwell into something almost superhuman. He could see the expression on a man's face. He could count the buttons on a uniform. He could place a bullet through a gap in sandbags the size of a fist. The Germans had excellent optics as well, but their tactics had grown predictable. They relied on concealment and stillness, assuming that if they could not be seen, they could not be killed. Hartwell understood something deeper, understood that stillness was not enough. A sniper had to think like prey and predator, simultaneously invisible. Yes, but also always moving, always adapting, never giving the enemy a pattern to exploit. And so he became the thing the Germans feared most. An enemy they could not predict, could not locate, and could not kill. On the morning of the fourth day, Hartwell was called back to the command post. The captain met him outside, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his expression unreadable. "You're done, Corporal." Hartwell frowned. "Sir, enemy sniper activity in this sector has dropped to zero. We haven't had a single kill in 48 hours? Whatever you did, it worked. We're rotating you back to the company. They need riflemen on the line." Hartwell said nothing for a moment. He looked down at the Springfield in his hands, the wood stock worn smooth by his grip, the barrel still cold from the morning air. He thought of the 9 men he had killed, the faces he had seen through the scope in the seconds before he fired. He did not feel pride, did not feel guilt. He felt only the weight of necessity, the knowledge that what he had done was required, that it had worked. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. The captain studied him for a moment, then nodded. "That's a hell of a rifle you've got there. Corporal, a hell of a rifle." Hartwell allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. "Yes, sir, it is." The story of Daniel Hartwell and his Springfield M1903 became one of many quiet legends whispered among soldiers in the European theater. Most men never heard of him. He was not interviewed by journalists. He did not receive a Medal of Honor or a promotion beyond sergeant by war's end. His kills were recorded in after-action reports filed in dusty cabinets and forgotten. But among the men who served in the Ardennes that frozen January, his name carried weight. They remembered the days when German snipers ruled the forest, and they remembered the silence that followed when the old rifle spoke. The Springfield itself continued to serve throughout the war, carried by snipers in Europe and the Pacific. In the hands of men like Hartwell, it proved that age did not equal obsolescence, that sometimes the old ways were still the best ways. While other soldiers praised the Garand's firepower, snipers knew the truth. In their world, one perfect shot was worth a dozen good ones. The rifle's reputation grew. Reports filtered back from other theaters. In the Pacific, Marine snipers used Springfields to devastating effect against Japanese forces, picking off officers and machine gun crews from distances that seemed impossible. In Italy, Army snipers disrupted German artillery spotters and communication lines. The weapon that had been dismissed as too old, too slow, too obsolete, had become the most feared rifle in American hands, not for its rate of fire, but for its cold, unerring precision. After the war, the Springfield M1903 was phased out entirely, replaced by newer bolt-action designs, and eventually by semi-automatic sniper rifles that combined accuracy with faster follow-up shots. The rifles were sold as surplus, ending up in the hands of hunters and collectors. Many were sporterized, shortened, restocked, and modified for civilian use. Others were simply scrapped, melted down, and forgotten, but a few survived, preserved. In museums and private collections, there were stocks still bearing the marks of military service, their barrels still capable of the precision that made them legendary. When historians study the weapons of the Second World War, they often focus on the innovations: the M1 Garand, the Thompson submachine gun, the Browning automatic rifle. The Springfield is relegated to footnotes, remembered as a relic of an earlier era, yet those who understand warfare on the intimate, individual level know better. They know that in the hands of a skilled marksman, that old rifle was not obsolete, it was timeless. A tool so perfectly suited to its purpose that no amount of technological advancement could truly replace it. There is a photograph, faded and creased, taken somewhere in Belgium in early 1944. It shows a group of soldiers gathered around a foxhole. Their faces gaunt and tired, their uniforms caked with mud. In the center, barely visible, is a young man holding a rifle with a scope mounted on top. The image is blurry, the details lost to time, but the outline of the weapon is unmistakable. A Springfield M1903. A rifle, they said, was too old for war. The man holding it is not named in the caption. Just another soldier. Just another face among thousands. But somewhere in the trees, beyond the frame, beyond the reach of the camera, were 9 empty sniper nests. 9 positions that would never be occupied again. 9 ghosts added to the forest silence. And in that silence, there was a truth that no amount of firepower could obscure. Sometimes, the quietest weapon is the deadliest. Wars are often remembered by their grand movements, the sweep of armies, the roar of tanks, the thunder of bombers overhead. But beneath that noise, in the spaces between explosions and the pauses between battles, there exists another kind of warfare. Silent, patient, deadly. It is the war fought by individuals who measure their success not in ground taken or enemies, rooted, but in single, perfect moments of lethal clarity. The Springfield M1903 was never designed to be fast. It was not built to overwhelm with volume. It was crafted to do one thing supremely well: place a bullet exactly where it needed to go, no matter the distance, no matter the conditions. In an age that celebrated speed and firepower, it was an anachronism, a reminder that sometimes precision matters more than power, and perhaps that is the deeper lesson. In a conflict defined by industrial slaughter and mechanized destruction, where millions died in vast, impersonal waves, the sniper's rifle represented something different. It represented the skill of the individual, the power of patience, the victory of thought over brute force. Daniel Hartwell carried that rifle into a frozen forest and proved that old did not mean useless, that slow did not mean weak, that a single, well-placed shot could achieve what 1,000 hasty ones could not. He reminded those around him and those who came after that in war, as in life, it is not always the loudest voice or the fastest action that prevails. Sometimes it is the quiet one, the careful one, the one who waits until the moment is right and then does not miss. The Springfield M1903 was too old for war, they said. Until it wasn't, until it became the weapon that enemy snipers feared most, until it silenced the forest and gave frightened men the courage to move again, till it proved that some tools, some skills, some truths are timeless, waiting patiently through the ages for the moment when they are needed most. And when that moment comes, they do not fail. They never do.